Добро пожаловать на наши рок-посевы.
Новгородцев стал первым диск-жокеем в истории радиовещания на территории Советского Союза. А с конца 70-х годов его голос прорывался к советским слушателям из Лондона. Кавалер ордена Британской империи, легендарный радиоведущий Сева Новгородцев. Не пропустите уникальную встречу с легендой.
Дева Сева Новгородцев, город Лондон, Тбилиси.
Well, here you have it. The whole lifetime packed into 5 minutes and 25 seconds. Today's event is called Talk. And to me, talking is a reciprocal process. So rather than lecture you on wonderful achievements of my life, I would like to talk to you. And we could start from anywhere. Maybe some of the slides caught your attention or you fancy knowing more about that. So I think we should go haphazardly. Ask me whatever you want to know and I'll answer you to the best of my ability. Okay? So let's talk. The ball is in your court, by the way.
I have a question. Was that you with Chevy Chase in that one?
Was that me?
Was there, I think there was a picture of you and Chevy Chase, and you were wearing a Russian hat. Was it the actor?
I thought
Yeah.
too.
Yes, it was me. It was my brief film career. I was in James Bond as you know, View to a Kill, and also I was consulting at the time. And John Landis, I got a job as a consultant on Spies Like Us. So he looked at me and he said, "Come with me," and he sat me in front of the camera, and he said, "Say something in Russian." Obviously, what a boy who grew under Stalin can say. Obviously, I launched into a little poem that I knew from as I was a young pioneer. I'll do it in Russian. Шуршит по крыше снеговая крупка, на Спасской башне полночь бьют часы, знакомая негаснущая трубка, чуть тронутые проседью усы. That was a poem about Stalin, obviously. And John Landis was impressed and he gave me the part. Now, I played Turkmenian border guard. Now, John Landis is the kind of director who likes to put in-jokes into his films. And the in-joke here was that he took a very well-known public figure from the realm of radio and paired me with Costa Gavras, who is a French Yugoslav progressive filmmaker of very liberal left of center persuasions. And he was looking for some finance for his film, and John Landis said, "Okay, you play a Turkmenian bodyguard for me and I'll get you the money." So the in-joke was the two separate people, well known in their own fields, came together on a film set to play some silly, silly parts. John Landis, I will have you know, is a director who is not afraid of taking risks, very often at the expense of the actors who take part in the film. In my case, we were filming in Norway, and obviously you Americans were firing at us to those characters. Now, the health and safety rule is that you build everything that looks wooden or out of the cheap plastic or some light plastics, and then paint it accordingly. So when the bullets blow, and the technology is well known, they put the charges in there, cover it with paint, and then the electrician goes with the wire under, and they go chick, 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 chick. But in our case, the wooden pillar was real wood. It was a Norwegian pine. So it blew up and went flying all over the place and pierced my upper lip here. Luckily it was not the eye. Now, if we were filming in America or in Britain, it would have been A&R, would send me to the hospital maybe for a day or two or maybe more. But luckily we were in Norway, and so the Norwegian doctor came up to me and made me a huge ball of ice and snow, and he said, keep it against your lip and you'll be all right. And in 40 minutes we continued on filming with no adverse effects at all. So that's, and then there's a good story about me doing the James Bond. I was working in a different picture for HBO called The Gulag. It's long forgotten and for a very good reason. Anyway, I was consulting there, and as such, I was responsible for hiring Russian parts, Russian actors. And there was a particular scene in the labor camp where the inmates, while doing the lumber work, felling trees, caught a fox and brought it into the labor camp just to create general chaos and do some of the things that they were planning to do. And the guard, the KGB guard, shoots the fox and restores the order. Now, for that part, I cast acquaintance of mine, Volodya, with a face 9x12, proper Russian guard. But the bastard got drunk on the day. He didn't turn up on the set. And so the director said, you cast him, and I said, yes. Well, I said, get dressed in a uniform and go on the set. And I was so angry with Volodya, so I channeled my anger into that part, and I shot Volodya first. And I said, wow, man, you were mean, very convincing. And we had the first assistant who was going to be on a Bond film. Now, the first assistant, I will let you know, is the one who choreographs everything that's in the frame. Like extras walking in and out, or cars going in and moving out as well. So, when they needed a helicopter pilot, the Scottish chap says, oh, we have this, he'll do your part, no problem. So, and he said, it's £300 a day, would you agree? And I said, yes, why not? So by the time I turned up on the set, the helicopter in a model form, about 4 foot in diameter, has been shot down and blown up. So it was just a case of killing me now. And James Bond kills us by shooting a pink-colored rocket straight into the helicopter. Now, when I turned up on the set, there was just nothing, and film sets are normally very sort of dirty places, full of cigarette stubs and dust and whatnot. So there was a helicopter cabin built out of plywood and painted military green. And there was a Polish chap pretending to be Russian, because the Poles always put in their CVs that they speak fluent language. And me, obviously for a speaking part. And they said, action! And I said, excuse me, what action? What do I do? And the director says, well, you're looking down and James Bond can't see him and blah, blah. Say something. So I looked out from that plywood helicopter onto the imaginary ice formations of Iceland, and I said to the Pole, "Попробуй тут, найди кого-нибудь. Just try and find somebody in here." Now, we spool forward for 15 years. I married Olga in '99, and for the wedding, she had her 2 daughters. And the younger one was 15 then. And she needed her mother so much, and under the British law, if she was under 16, she could stay with her mother. So she stayed with us for the next 15 or so years. And we lived then in a huge former military hospital built during the Crimean War, which is when the Russians were shooting at the English. And Florence Nightingale was starting the new phenomenon in field medicine, which is care, which is looking after the wounded soldiers, because before that, if you were wounded, you were as good as dead. And so there was this lady with the lamp, and Lord Herbert, who was Minister of War in Britain then, found the finance to build a hospital, which is still standing, but it's no longer a hospital. It was turned into flats in the 70s. And one of the flats we lived in. Now, there was some space within the hospital that they couldn't turn into a living space. So they turned into a club, a gym, a swimming pool, only for the residents. And people would descend into this club in their slippers and their nightgowns, because it was like a huge family. They were all drinking, watching television, you know, swapping news. And Anastasia, this 15-year-old girl who couldn't speak, became like a pet of the military unit. So they all passed her on and taught her English, and she was charming and young. And finally she met a young actor, a Scottish actor, a huge fan of Bondiana. And she said, "Well, my stepfather was in James Bond film." And he said, "Which one?" And she said, "A View to a Kill." He said, "Who did you play?" "The Russian helicopter pilot." And this Scottish chap said, "Попробуй тут найди кого-нибудь." So what I'm saying, all things go round. They don't disappear ever. And the residue of whatever you do, whatever you say, will probably come back to you. And if it's a good scenario, they won't haunt you. Oh dear. Anything at all?
Other questions?
Okay.
So I couldn't help but notice that you met the Queen, so I'm wondering, is there a story behind it? I'm sure there is.
In England, as you know, they deliver the mail just by pushing it through the door. There's a little slot and it all falls down. And in the morning I used to come down and in my dressing gown and sort out the mail and see who was. So I got this letter with strange sort of printouts of crown in red and some imperial lettering. I don't know. So I went upstairs to the kitchen, and I can't make the head or tails out of this letter. It is all written in subjunctive mood, multi-layered. Would you, if we would nominate you, in case you should win the nomination, would accept what is implied in the letter? I later understood what they meant, because in the liberal intelligentsia, people like directors or big actors, see the greatest honor not in accepting the Queen's commission, but refusing it. Because that, you said, you know, they tried to give me the ladyship or lordship. I said no. So I wrote back and I said, yes, I would be honored, because it's not for me, it was being done, but for the mutual process that existed between what I was doing on the radio and the audience. Because the audience was at times huge. I didn't know how big it was, but English papers estimated it at 25 million at some point, and I used to joke that it was in the papers, it must be true. And so then we went to the Virgin Islands. We have a little plot of land there, so occasionally when we got enough money for the plane tickets, we go and watch the grass grow there. And my friend on the Virgin Islands is old local gentleman called Clifford Martin. Now, Clifford Martin sold us the land because I look like his grandfather. His grandfather was Scottish and a lawyer, and he came, made some money in the Virgin Islands, and like all people with English background, he believed in owning a lot of land. So he bought everything that was for sale on the island. And then, when Clifford was young, he was telling him, you know, grandson, I can't leave you any money, but I leave you all the land you can see around you. So Clifford, when he was short of funds, was selling bits of land and sold us half an acre. Now, Clifford couldn't for the life of him pronounce my name, which is simple enough, Sibyl. He called me Sybil. Because I'm not a lady, he called me Sybil Boy. And he has a huge voice like trumpets of Jericho. And so I wake up in the morning and said, hello, Sybil Boy, how are you this morning? And because he has got the telephone, I haven't, he said, Sybil Boy, telephone for you. And a friend from the BBC was saying, Sevachka, I've seen your name in the honours list in the Times newspaper, so you're going to get it. So when we came back, we got lots of paperwork, different colours and hues of gold and silver and whatnot, arrangements of all kinds. For instance, you can't just turn up in Buckingham Palace dressed in jeans or even in your best suit. It's not good enough. You have to go and hire the full, operetta attire, which is the cylinder hat and the long coat and the striped trousers and the lacquered this and that, and a silk tie, and special passes were issued. So we drove our old rusty Mercedes car straight into the Buckingham Palace. There was a parking space reserved for us, and we walked past the, we call them kirasiri. Kirasa is a helmet, shining like a gold. And the gentlemen are very tall, about 6'5" or taller. And they have high boots up to here in lacquered leather, in patented leather. I can tell you, it looks interesting. Anyway, so we proceeded into Her Majesty's picture gallery. All the famous names, all the Rubenses and Michelangelos are in there. No windows though, the light comes from the ceiling. And we were instructed as to how to behave yourself when facing the Queen. After the first sentence, when you answer, you add at the end, Your Majesty. Your Majesty. And after that, you can shorten it to ma'am, as in jam. So, and Queen was amazingly well prepared. There was 313 people being awarded that day, and she does it twice a year, in summer, and I was in the April batch. And for all 313 people, she had enough prepared questions not to call me a hero of Afghanistan or something. She knew exactly who I was. She said, and you worked with World Services? I said, yes, Your Majesty. She said, for how long? I said, 30 years, ma'am. And then she said, what you will be telling your listeners today? And I thought she was really interested in what I was going to tell her. So they said, well, today I'm going to tell you what happened to me this, in the Buckingham Palace. And didn't add ma'am, because I was carried on with the conversation. And I thought that I caught a glint of steel in her eye. Because I imagined that we're the best of friends with her. And she finished the whole thing by putting the decoration on my lapel. Now, if she were to pin the decoration as the designed for on everybody, she would have bloody fingers by the end of the day. So there's a little technical secret. We all had a little rounded hook, barely visible. And the decoration had a tiny little ring attached to it. So the queen would put the ring on the hook, and that was it. You were done. You're not supposed to turn your back to the queen, so you say, Majesty, and go 5 steps backward. And only then you can turn and go. To finish this story, I took the trouble of traveling 5,000 miles or more over the ocean, and there's huge Straits of America to bring it this. So you know that it's not a fairy tale that I told you. This is the MB, member of the British Empire. And they very often ask us, you know, Russian are quite mercenary people. They say, did they give you a raise? I mean, what was it for? So I say, well, I have no privileges really. The only one. In London there's this huge cathedral, St. Paul's, the second biggest in the world. And this cathedral has a chapel. Now, in this chapel, I can apply and have my time for birthdays, weddings, or funerals. Well, I haven't claimed any one of them yet. So that's the story of the decoration. I don't show it often, but on special occasions like this, you understand me, I simply had to. Otherwise, your trip to this auditorium will be nearly wasted. Okay.
I would like to know when you left the Soviet Union and under what circumstances, please.
Right, okay. I have a gulp of water here. The year is 1975. I had my musical career at the end. First, I was playing in an American-style big swing band. We were playing all the music that you know very well. But then the constraints of the political pressure on us were such that we had to compromise. Had to take in Soviet-style singers who were, "You're dancing, naughty boy," you know, this kind of stuff. And when the volume of compromise was such that no jazz was left at all, I left the band and went with the newly emerging pop bands. They were all failed jazzmen, so I knew them. They took guitars and finally they were working for some concert agency in the Far East because it was, you know, lax control and they could make a lot of money by playing 3 shows a day or even more. But they wanted to work in Moscow for Central Agency. And they invited me to be a band leader, not because I knew more about music, but because I knew what we call the theatrical intrigue. I knew how to pull the strings, because my jazz band leader, Joseph Weinstein, was absolute master of it. So I learned a few tricks from him. So I managed to bring them over to Moscow, and we worked there for a couple of years, but it was the most disastrous 2 years in my life. Why? To be able to wear our hair long, the boys invented this kind of fable story, that they are young blades from the days, you know, of the yore, Dobry Molodцы. And they would find old forgotten Russian songs and arrange them beautifully for the guitars. And that was our first set. And then second set we played something different, allowable. But in Russia you have to pass on the artistic committee, Khudsovet. Otherwise they won't write out you the documents for the road. Now it so happened that Russian folk mafia, Zyrikina and all this kind of folk singers, felt threatened by our presence. Because here are the boys singing Russian folk music and getting huge audiences. Now the audiences obviously were coming not to hear the folk music, but because it's a new genre, because there are guitars, because it's all exciting, it's a pop, it's a new emerging thing. And so they started crush us at the artistic committees. So the year 1971 I spent in trying to pass the artistic committee 11 times. All my grey hair comes from there. So you come on stage and this party faces looking at you like ready to devour you or cut your head off. And you go, "Детстве помню." Awful. And without their approval we couldn't work. So they would send us onto the illicit bits of travel, you know, by direct connection and that. So in the end, I decided to leave it. And the deciding part in that was that fasting for health was popular among musicians. And so I fasted for 3 days, then for 7, and then for 21. Now on the 16th day, the universe opened its wisdom for me. When the flesh is mortified, the spirit soars. And I thought, what the hell are you doing here? With your saxophone going, la, da, 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 da. So I left them and went back home to Leningrad, to the flat which I shared with my wife, whom I divorced by then. So we were separate entities, and she very much wanted to emigrate. But she had no hope in hell. She was a Russian Tatar, Muslim girl. Through university, all kind of civilized French language, etc. And I'm half Jewish on my father's side. So we theoretically could emigrate to Israel then, because there was Jackson-Vanik, motion in the Congress, and the Soviets had to let the Jews out, otherwise they wouldn't get any grain from America. So that was the deal. Now, I was a cultural patriot. I didn't want to leave. And Gala, which was my wife's name, she worked for the Leningrad Airport International Division with the French. Now, every Soviet organization had a resident KGB officer. It was a must. He was looking at the personnel and this kind of thing. But they had nothing to do. So they were inventing all sorts of schemes, pushing people, loggerheads or scheming something. So Gale, and Gale, the KGB officer didn't like Gale much because she was elegant. She had some foreign students as friends. They were bringing her some fashionable clothes. He didn't like it a bit, because if something happens on your watch, you are to blame. So they'd rather have nothing of that. And she arrives at work one day, and the whole book of airline tickets, this thick, worth probably $10,000 or $20,000, is gone from the desk. And he says, well, it's a criminal felony, and we start the proceedings. Now, Gala was a beautiful woman and very proud one. She said to me, if they put me in prison, I'll end my life. I won't stay in the prison. And so this KGB chap played cat and mouse with her for a week, and then said, pretending it was a good fellow, said, we know each other so long, just write, that you voluntarily resign, and that will be enough for me. And of course, 2 days later, the girls in the local mafia knew who'd done that. And she pressed the girl and she confessed that the KGB officer made her steal the book of tickets. And then Gala said to me, we can't live in this country. Now, I was still in love with her and I wanted her back. So the deal was like we marry again and we emigrate together in the hope that the family will stay. Now, interesting detail. When I was the Young Blades band leader, on the first day I had to change my name. Imagine, the concert ending and I announce everybody, bass guitar, this is Antipin, guitar is Samwigan. And then the drummer announces me. And the leader of the Young Blades, Seva Levenstein. Now, in an anti-Semitic country like Russia, there was like a ripple going across the audience. And I realized that it is tactless, because in the old Russia, which we are representing, there were no Levensteins. Yeah, different country, like 300 years ago. So I became Novgorodsov, and that is my public name now for nearly 50 years. But as the band became popular, we were invited to television shows and radios, and you cannot enter a television station unless you have a pass and it matches your passport. Now, I come with one name and the pass is for another. So my policy then was to blend, to become invisible, and somehow stay, for the rest of my life. So I officially changed the name, I became Seva Novgorodsov. Paragraph 5 is luckily in my passport as Russian, so that's it. And I grew a mustache to look like a chap from Georgia rather than a Jew. And Gala said, we have to leave. Okay. Our friends organized an invitation from Israel. It was obviously for the family of Levensteins. And I'm Novgorodsov. So I had a cunning plan. I marry Gala and take her name. So we come to the public office and I said, well, I want to marry this young woman and take her name. It is not against the Soviet law, is it? They said no. But then they did their paperwork and I said, well, you were divorced from this gentleman. I said, yes. So you must get your maiden name first, Burkhanova, which is a Tatar name. And he says to me, and then you can take the name and become Burkhanov. Now, the piquancy of the moment that anybody who got invitations from Israel was immediately under the searchlight of the KGB. And the unwritten instruction was, if you could put them away in prison, do it. I mean, if some small misdemeanors or a little speculation on the side or whatever. We were clean, but still it was a very precarious situation. So my next scenario was that Gala, morning, no makeup, and beautiful ladies who had their face made up for years looked very like, well, a bit forlorn without it. So she put a modest handkerchief and headscarf, and I drove her in a taxi to the court where we were divorced. And she goes to the clerk and said, on such and such a date I was divorced here. I said, yes. Do you want your maiden name back? And Gala says, well, you see, in the intervening years, I graduated from the university. My diploma is at Levenstein. I had my son born, he's Rena Levenstein. She says, I know it's not a convenient name to live with, but could you leave it for me? And the clerk says, well, it's not against the Soviet law. And she left it there. Gala comes out of the court and says, okay. And I said to the driver, to the public office, please, I'm marrying this woman. And this is how I got my name back. And obviously, as a family of Levensteins, we emigrated. Now, the route was, we went to Austria, where there was the first processing center. And there were people from the Jewish agency HIAS, which is an agency for aiding something. actually was formed at the initiative of Albert Einstein in the 30s, when the Jews had to flee to Germany. And American authorities were not too keen to have the Jews in here. So it was kind of, you know, some kind of struggle. We explained to Hayas that I'm a wrong kind of Jew because my mother's Russian. I've been brought up as Russian and Russian culture and Russian language, never prayed to Yahweh or whatever, no language skills at all. And the Jews recognize Jewishness through the mother's line. So I was not. And then I have this wife who is a Muslim, is a Tatar, and a son who is half Tatar. So we're obviously wrong people for Israel. They sent us to the International Rescue Committee, and we ended up in Italy. Now, it is coming very interesting because Texas is involved, strangely enough, in the next chapter of my story. We were destined for Canada, for Edmonton. So if nothing happened then, I would be Edmontonian now. I'm probably not standing in front of you. But strange things began to kind of converge. We lived in the cheap end of Lido di Ostia, which is a little resort town on the seashore. Now, in summer it is quite expensive, but the flat owners, the apartment owners, were eager to rent it to the Russians because they were staying all the year round. And in general, they got more money. So we have this tiny little flat with an Italian-style patio, 6 by 6 meters, which is 18 by 18 feet in your measurements. And I played football with my 8-year-old son, and suddenly there comes a gentleman with a beautiful sun-tanned face. He just off the skiing holiday. He came to see his mother, and his mother, strangely enough, lives in the same house with us. She was on the way to America to her elder son. And he was a jazz aficionado, and he knew me as a jazz musician. So he comes in and says, "Sir, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, like everybody else, I'm waiting for my papers and go to Canada." He said, "Why don't you join us?" And I said, "Who you?" He said, "Us at the BBC." I was always a little bit, away from the politics because we as jazz musicians thought it as something below us, not quite the thing to do. I was never interested in it and never involved in it in any way. And Gary, God bless her cotton socks, she said, "Come on, go, off you go, pass the test and do the rest of it." So I went to Rome, and I did translations, and I read something on the microphone, and I've written a piece. I remember I watched Polanski's Chinatown 2 days previously. So I written a little essay. It was nothing special, but I passed. Then came the editor from the BBC, had the interview with me. I spoke decent English, he was impressed enough. And then they sent my papers to you-know-where. Because at that time, they were still checking as who is coming to work for the BBC. I was clean, I was not a member of the party, I was not in the KGB archives, etc. So they passed me. And finally, from England arrived a beautiful piece of paper called the work contract. It's a BBC. I showed it to my Italian landlord, and he said, BBC? Because they read it differently. Now, it was all fine, except that we could not cross the border. We had no papers at all. Because the Russians let us out of the country, first stripping us of the citizenship, and made us to pay 500 smakas for everyone, for losing the citizenship. Now, 500, to put you in the context, was 4.5 monthly wages, nearly half a year. It was a huge amount of money. And which made me think that every Soviet citizen who carries his passport in his pocket carries minus 500 smackers there. It has a negative value. And I said, what do we do? I said, well, we go to the police department, the Questura in Rome. Now, Questura comes from the word quest, or questa. This is an institution which existed in ancient Rome. They were the kind of the criminal investigators of the ancient times. Initially there were two, then Julius Caesar brought them up to 40, he liked his bureaucracy. And by the time I entered Questura, it was a huge building with thick, 12-foot thick walls, with armed guards and everything, which took this whole block in Rome. And well, you go in, you wait in the queue for about 4 hours, and then your turn comes up. And there was this clerk who was filling in the papers. And said name, nome, cognome, and then said adesso, adesso. Now, we lived in Ostia on a street which named after the Italian Arctic country. He did some Arctic explorations. His name is Umberto Cagni. Umberto Cagni, 21, 21. So I said, Umberto Cagni, 21. He said, oh, and me, I also live in Umberto Cagni, 21, in different town, because this admiral was so popular, they were naming streets for him in every little town. And then he says, children, figli, and said, sì, figlio Renato. Renato is a Tatar name. But he says to me, and I'm also Renato, Italian Renato, right? So we had a little chat and then parted company. And he said to me the phrase which stayed with me for the next year. He said, come next week, in Italian, settimana prossima. So I come next week, sit for 4 hours, come to face a different clerk. He said, settimana prossima, and on we go. And I felt that it would go forever, and I would never leave Italy unless something miraculous happens. So here comes the Texan gentleman. I was sitting in a queue reading, as usual, some English pocket-sized books to kill time. And somebody says, oh, you speak English, blah, blah, and then we started talking. He was Texan, evangelical priest, working with Vatican Film Commission. There are some strange things like that. And he said, you know, Sila, I have 5 films, science pop, obviously, leaning towards religion, that are already dubbed in Russian. Let's show them to your compatriots. And so we started this hopeless thing. One thing was very tempting for the Russians. Joel was his name. After a little sermon, he would give out free Bibles. Now, free Bible, the Bible on the Russian black market in 1976 was costing about 150 rubles. It was the most expensive book because religion was outlawed and people were thirsting for that kind of knowledge. And here we are, you know, you can get it for free. Obviously, we had a mission working in no time. The atheists wanted their free Bible. Anyway, he gave me also some literature to read, which was what is known now under Intelligent Design label, written by scientists, purely scientific point of view, no Bible quotations, only, you know. And finally I was convinced, also the angel quietly told me, you're never going to leave this place unless you take a decisive step. And so Joel finally baptized me in the center of Rome, in a Protestant church, beautiful marble font, you know, submersions, all that. And next Wednesday, as usual, I go to Questura, nearly a year has passed. After 4 hours, I find myself facing the same clerk who filled my papers a year ago. And he doesn't recognize me and he says, well, settimana prossima. And then, thinking a little bit, says, aspetta, I said, wait a little. Vi ho un Vertacani 21. I said, sì. Figlio Renato. I said, sì. Porca Madonna. And he opened the drawer, and I swear there was nothing in it except my file. And so he wrote on it, urgente, and then 10 days later we left for London. Now this is not the end of the celestial human. I didn't know what I was going to be on radio. And only looking at the old Italian photographs, I was driving a Volkswagen Beetle bought of a Dutch student in Piazza di Spagna for $170. Anyway, the Dutch plates go 2 figures and then 2 letters in the middle. And looking very intently through the magnifying glass, I saw these 2 letters. They were G.J. So I had to take my job very seriously indeed. Now, the radio voice transmutated over the time. When I joined the BBC, I had to remember the background of the Soviet radio. They all had standard voices and standard pronunciation. And that was a very, very detailed selection process. So if you switched your radio on in Kaliningrad in the west of the country or in Vladivostok, the voices were identical. They were all absolutely the same. So remembering that, I wanted to get away from formality of Soviet broadcasting voice. So my initial technique was to speak very softly, with no voice projection, on relaxed voice chord, close to the mic. So when I hear my own recordings of 1977, it was an ideal voice to do a badger in a cartoon, yes. A badger's voice from country. But then the audience wanted more projection, and I progressed from there. Still, the description of the voice according to Novgorodtsev is quite simple. If you imagine a voice being a stream of water, then on one end of the scale you have an Italian tenor who goes La! And it goes like 10 feet or more, 20 feet away. And on the other you have a Russian drunk who you can meet somewhere, in an archway. Says, "Hey, товарищ, там так." So the voice flows down the chest. So my general rule of thumb was to project the voice at least a foot or foot and a half, not further, because otherwise you become artificial and not really talking to people, but rather listening to yourself. And being a musician, I'm used to listening to myself. So I imagine for many years they have lazy lips in Russian. So, and I developed a series of exercises. BL is a very difficult combination. So I have blah, 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 blah. All the vowels go. And then, obviously, all the tongue twisters. Говорили про покупки, про какие, про покупки, про покупки, про покупки, про покупочки мои. Или бык, тупогубенький бычок, у быка губа тупа. So I had to warm myself up before every broadcast every day. And it kind of accumulates over the years. So in the end, people started accusing me of over-pronunciation in Russian. But in my book, over-pronunciation is better than under-pronunciation. When I joined the BBC, the best voices for the radio were shrill ladies' voices. Because they went through the jamming. You couldn't jam those voices, as we all know. And suave male baritones were jammed like that. You couldn't hear a thing. But once the Soviet Union stopped jamming us, the all kind of aesthetic values came back. So I must say, as a radio person, that America is the land of the best radio voices. I'm not flattering, I really think so. I don't know what is in your education system which makes people to speak clearly, well pronounce all the syllables and etc., and create this male baritone sort of range. First I encountered such a person in Rome. There was a local English-speaking radio, and there was a fellow who wrote an article about me and invited me for an interview. It was a symphony of radio sound. He was rolling me into his baritonal, velvety kind of stuff. And I thought, bloody hell, that's... especially because modern Russia has very poor vocal culture on the radio. A lot of people with good ideas, good education, liberal values, etc., but not very good in speech department. They're humming and ahhing, and their voices don't sound nice, etc. I always said very cruelly that Russian dissidents have terrible table manners. And unfortunately it's true, and it shows itself on the radio.
But where would you put Vladimir Posner's voice there? Because he's part American, part Russian, part French.
He's a political chameleon. Posner is a son of a prominent communist, and he was born in Paris. He speaks fluent French. Then he was, I think, educated in the States, so he has a beautiful American. And then as he worked as a professional for the Russians, his Russian is pretty good. But I don't blame him for lack of moral scruples. Anyone who works in this system will bend to it. It's impossible otherwise. But I remember him doing the telebridges when he was representing Russia in the most beautiful way. And I suppose that years working for the powers that be gained him certain kudos. He is part of the system. So he is not accepted by the modern liberals at all. He is seen as part of the Putin cronies, but he is undoubtedly a professional. I had a meeting with him in London. He interviewed me, but I knew from the start this interview wouldn't go anywhere because it didn't quite fit their criteria of being on the government television channel. So much the better, Keep your clothes clean.
But what about his voice? Because he is American.
Right.
That was the question.
Yeah, I mean, if you hear him speak French, he probably will be French. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the beauty of foreign language is that when you master it, you can be a different person. Because you obviously involve not just the sound of the language, but the idioms and what is behind the idioms and the way people behave and present themselves, etc. So it's a kind of liberating experience, well, I found anyway. Seven Novgorodtsev in Russian is quite a different person.
I'm sort of wondering about, because you were saying about the sort of vocal culture, and one of the things that I've noticed, if you listen to, you watch Russian news programs, is that people really do make an attempt to talk really fast, and it's kind of, and they sort of mush the words together. And I wonder if is that what you're talking about when you say that there's a sort of poor?
Yeah.
I mean, is it just that it's kind of rushed speech, or is it something
Well,
else?
in English, as I noticed, the meaning comes at the very end of the word, so you have to finish the words. Otherwise, In Russian, you start the word and that's enough. No, sure, Russia. It's all quite clear. And that's the basic linguistical difference, because you don't have to finish. Also, I was a language coach on many, many pictures. And I was trying to explain that Russian-sounding speech is not pushing your R's, you know. I roll it, roll it, roll it. It's not Russian. Russian is speaking with the back of your throat and using all the resonators in the mouth. Like the most classical Russian accent was with ballerina Natalia Makarova. She used to say, Russian body! And that's how you use, because Russian could be formed with vowels only. If you master that open sound, which fills your head, you're halfway. Because the English is all forward, and to a certain degree an American. Because you have to all the consonants and the R's, you know, here. But Russian. I remember asking a Russian businessman something, and he said, never mind. I told the story. I was flying the plane a couple of weeks ago, and there was a huge Russian sitting next to me. So he saw me obviously as somebody foreign, probably English speaking, and so he said, "Excuse me, toilet!" And that's a typical Russian projection. You know, full-bodied voice. And, the businessman said, "It depends, как говорится." There are all kinds of jokes. A businessman orders in a restaurant and said, "Waiter, 2 vodkas." "Is it all right that I do it in English?" He says. Ничего, что я по-английски. But it's all going, you know, in the past because everybody speaks English, and the new generation of Russian business people, most of them were educated already in the West. Many have gone through English colleges and universities. So you may encounter impeccable Oxford English in some of the new Russians. Mind you, it's a bit, you know, false on certain levels, but still. All the school is going into the history now. We have a new phenomenon where the money rules, and the money means that you can send your children to be educated in the best establishments in the world, including, of course, the University of Texas.
So tell me about your mindset of leaving Russia and you want to be this sort of staid, private person, and then you find yourself with a microphone in front of your face in a foreign country.
Well, I never said I wanted to be a private person, you know, being on stage for so many years. But I was, in a way, a very private person for many years, because what is radio? You come to the empty studio, there's your script, there's your microphone, and you have no idea if anybody is listening or not. In fact, I knew quite well that no one is, because we were jammed for the first 10 years of... when I went to Russia in 1990, and that was pandemonium, my fans congregated, there was nearly 1,000 of them, so they stopped the airport functioning, so the customs people had to pull me out of the queue and eject me through the side door. Anyway, then I realized that people were listening and they were telling me all sorts of stories. Most popular were huge military sets which the conscripts used to listen to me, because they had the extra fine tuning. They had a kind of millimeter range, and then they finally get through. Many were caught and had some serious trouble at the military service. Some people were using radiators as a kind of extended area. You had to clean the metal there, put the copper wire, stick it to the radio set, and then it would... Also, there was illicit business of making radios with a different wavelengths. Like the Russians were all 25 meters, 31, and there were 19 and 16 meters, which some artisans were putting into the radio set for a special fee, and then you had the advantage. So it was fun. It was like cops and robbers. You know, we were playing games with the power, and many people were enjoying this to such a degree that now, when all these recordings are available in digital form and crystal clear sound, I said, it's not the same, it's not fun. There's no There was a joke that KGB called in a young man and they said, we have information that you listen to the foreign voices. He says, yes, I do. Often? He says, every day. Every single day, he says, yes. And what do we hear? He says, woo, woo, woo. Yeah, okay.
So I know you would read your fan mail on air. How did it take you a long time to pick which letters to read on air, or did you have a system by which you went by?
Well, letters is a separate topic. First letters started arriving via third countries. For instance, they would give a Cuban student or Albanian military, etc. And they would send it from their countries, because at every central post station there was a so-called illustration team, which is the KGB, well, low ranking. And I never seen it actually myself, but I heard many stories from veritable sources. They had a huge boiling water closed tank which built up the steam inside, and they had sort of enema type rubber hoses going into different directions, and they would go then open the letter, steam it up, open the letter, and see if it could be sent forward or thrown in a bin, or maybe sent to the investigators and whatnot. Some people actually got in prison for that. And when I came to Kiev in summer 1990, there was a gentleman who said, you know, I spent a year in prison, and I started to profusely, you know, saying I'm sorry. And he said, don't be. He said, in 10 days I'm off to the States, and they gave me the preference visa because I suffered listening to the BBC. So all kinds of stories. Anyway, after that, when Ronald Reagan was in power, you Americans invented or established some крылатые ракеты. What are they?
Tomahawk?
Tomahawks, probably.
Cruise missiles.
Cruise missiles, yes. Russians didn't have them, and the authorities were very nervous. So the stratagem was to publish an open letter to President Reagan. It was printed in a kind of handwritten form. Dear Mr. President, we are progressive youth, we are against the war, blah, blah, blah. Please remove the cruise missiles. Now there was a 14-year-old chap who lived in the Leningrad Oblast, and he quickly, you know, cottoned it. So he wrote me a letter, said, Dear Mr. President, and then in the same handwriting, which he mastered, he said, Привет, Сева! Времени мало, there's no time. Шутить не будем, давай. And of course he was psychologically absolutely spot on, because the illustration team didn't see any difference. It was all the same, dear Mr. President, so they passed it through. And so I got a lot of letters like that after that. There was a letter thrown off the Soviet ship in the English Channel, in a bottle. Now, it arrived by the shore, And I said, I remember what I said on there, and I said, I have no idea when it was written, but because it's written in such harsh political language, it's probably after the 1917. Now, it was some sort of sailor, poor chap, and he didn't know my address or where to write to, so he said, scribbled, BBC Sevnokorodze. And the Royal Mail, God bless them, they took the trouble to investigate. They rang the BBC, and the BBC, of course, a huge corporation, 40,000 people, 4 television channels, 6 radio stations. So they said, it's probably the World Service. So they rang the World Service, and they said, well, it's probably the Russians, isn't it? And so it came to me. To end long story short, I received more and more letters. They were influencing me, and we did the special letter programs for many years. And the best ones are still with me in my files at home. But there were letters that didn't make it on air. So I piled them up and put them in boxes and bags and changing families and addresses and whatnot, but I couldn't throw them away, see? And they were collecting dust for years and years. And finally, in 2014, there was an interest from the American Hoover Institute Library. And I managed to send them all there. 120 kilos, which you count it in pounds, 250 pounds of paper. And I say proudly today that our correspondence takes 6 meters, 34 centimeters of shelf space in the Hoover Institute archive, which is nearly 20 feet. It's quite a lot. So this story is very popular with the Russian audiences because I say to them, you know, you were scribbling your letters on those pieces of paper from the exercise books. And I said, some 200 or 300 years later, someone will write a PhD thesis based on your letters. And I say, oh!
By any chance did you visit the American exhibit at Sokonika Park in 1972? Исследование разработки США. And it was also in Tbilisi that year and also in Volgograd.
Well, 72 I was still not in the political process. But if you want American stories, I have plenty of them. I was a saxophone player in the 60s, and I desperately needed a particular mouthpiece. It was Otto Link, number 5 with a star. John Coltrane played number 4, then he switched on to number 6, and all the Stanley Tarantines and the rest of them are my ideals were playing. Where the hell do you get it in Russia? In America it was costing a lot of money, $60, because it's a special kind of bronze, normally reserved for making bells, bell bronze, gilded and precise work. So I couldn't possibly go through the black market routes. I had no talent for that. So I went to the Intourist, passed the entry exams, and they used to take even dubious personalities like myself because in summer they had a huge influx of tourists, 1 million a year. So they could use anybody. So I was enrolled in a full course of guides translators. Spent the whole winter studying 13 exams. It's the full tour of Leningrad, 4 hours, the Hermitage, 4 hours, etc., etc. One of the objects that we studied was the Museum of Atheism, which of course was housed in a Kazansky cathedral, because they were anti-religious then. In the basement, they had Spanish Inquisition exhibits, all the thumb screws and the fires and this and that. But on the next floor, it was all art, anti-religious art. And so whenever journalists ask me what is my favorite work of art, I have a ready answer. I saw it in the Atheism Museum. It was a huge concrete construction weighing 5 tons and covers with the mosaic tiles, making a picture. It was called Forced Circumcision of a Tartar Pioneer. So with this mullah with a sharpened knife, you know, after this foreskin of this poor boy, and he was fighting this. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the museum was moved elsewhere. It's no longer in the cathedral. Cathedral is now, you know, in God's domain again. But sometimes I pine for that 5-ton work of art and think, where is it now? Because they could have demolished it, cruel people.
But did you get your mouthpiece?
Huh? The mouthpiece. Now I got deceived a couple of times. There were some young American ladies, the students. I gave them money. They didn't send me anything. But then I struck the gold. An elderly gentleman, after the death of his wife, married her sister. He probably loved her all his life. And they were late 70s, early 80s. Now, as a young boy, very young boy, he was in Russia with his family. His father was one of the American engineers who installed steam boilers on the first Russian icebreaker, Yermak. And as such, they were received on the highest possible level. He said, I remember playing with the Tsar's children. Right? And now, at the twilight of his years, he wanted to see the flat and the places and everything. Now, I was a deluxe guide translator. I worked with rich Americans who had their own translator. 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours after lunch. And so I spent a week with them, going around the Vasilyevsky Ostrov, trying to find that place. And finally, I think we found it. And they were so touched, because they could draw a line over the memories of a lifetime. And I said, can we help you in anything? And I said, yes, I'm a musician. In fact, I invited them to one of our concerts, day concerts. So he knew I was not lying. And they did send me a mouthpiece. And it arrived, a beautiful package packed in a beautiful American bubble wrap and whatnot. And opened the box, and there was this golden mouthpiece. And my hands were shaking. And I put the reed on it, put it on the saxophone and blew. It sounded like a goat which is led to the market for slaughter. So I said to myself, you better be not born, you know, you wretched thing. But after a month or so, I got the sound. So, thank you, United States of America.